Welcome to the dimmed light. I am so glad you have found your way here tonight. Before we begin our journey into the past, I would like to ask you a question. Where are you right now? And what time is it in your corner of the world? Is the moon high above your roof? Or are the first rays of dawn touching your window? If you would like to share, please leave a comment down below. Knowing that we are all connected under the same sky brings a special kind of comfort. If you enjoy these slow journeys into history, please remember to subscribe to the channel and gently tap the notification bell so you never miss a moment of calm. Now, let us turn our attention to the here and now. The day has finished its course. Whatever tasks you had to complete, whatever worries occupied your mind, they no longer belong to this moment. You have done enough. It is time to let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Unclench your jaw. Softly close your eyes, or simply let your gaze soften until everything around you becomes a blur. Can you feel the weight of your body sinking into the mattress? Can you feel the gentle rhythm of your own breath? This is your safe harbor. We are about to step back in time to a place where the loudest sound is the flow of water and the wind in the cypress trees. Are you ready to walk with me? Are you ready to leave the noise of the modern world behind? Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. Let the story begin. The world was still suspended in the gray hush of the pre-dawn hour. It was that precise moment when the night had not yet fully surrendered, but the day had not yet claimed the sky. In the valley, the mist was thick. It clung to the ground like a soft, heavy quilt, obscuring the roots of the ancient olive trees and softening the sharp edges of the landscape. Marcus stood at the base of the great arch. He was a man of few words, a man who had spent more years listening to the language of stone than to the chatter of people. He was awake before the birds. He was awake before the sun. This was his time. The air was cool, carrying the damp, metallic scent of morning dew and wet limestone. He took a slow, deep breath, letting the chill fill his lungs, waking his senses one by one. He raised his hand slowly. He placed his palm flat against the massive pillar of the aqueduct. The stone was cold. It was rough against his skin, a texture that told 1,000 stories of the quarry from which it came. He closed his eyes. He did not just touch the stone, he felt it. He felt the immense weight of the blocks, stacked one upon another, rising high into the fading darkness. He felt the stability, the silence, the sheer endurance of the structure. Under his fingertips, if he concentrated enough, he could feel a very faint vibration. It was a hum, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but Marcus knew it. It was the pulse of the water. High above his head, in the covered channel at the very top of the arches, a river was flowing. It was a captive river, guided by human hands, flowing steadily, relentlessly, towards the distant city. He opened his eyes and looked up. The arches soared above him, disappearing into the white fog. They looked like the ribs of a giant beast that had laid down to rest in the valley centuries ago. The repetition of the curves was hypnotic. Arch after arch, pillar after pillar, marching silently across the countryside. There was a rhythm to it, a visual music that calmed his mind. Marcus adjusted the woolen cloak around his shoulders. The fabric was heavy and smelled of wood smoke from the previous night's fire. He began to walk. His sandals made a soft, crunching sound on the gravel path that ran alongside the aqueduct. Crunch, pause. Crunch, pause. He was in no hurry. There was nowhere else he needed to be. His duty was here, with the water and the stone. He stopped by a patch of wild fennel growing near the base of a pillar. The feathery leaves were laden with tiny droplets of water. He bent down, his movement slow and deliberate. He watched a single droplet slide down the thin green stem. It moved sluggishly, fighting gravity, until it reached the tip. It hung there for a moment, a perfect sphere reflecting the gray world around it, before falling silently into the dark earth. Water. It always sought the earth. It always sought the lowest point. His job, his entire life's work, was to guide it, to coax it gently across valleys and through mountains, keeping it at the perfect slope. Not too steep, or the water would rush and destroy the channel. Not too flat, or the water would stagnate and sleep. It had to be a perfect, gentle descent, a continuous slide of miles and miles. He resumed his walk. The fog was shifting slightly as the air began to warm, swirling around the stone pillars in slow, ghostly ribbons. He ran his hand along the masonry again. The mortar between the stones was hard as iron. He traced the line where two blocks met. It was a tight seam, a perfect fit. He admired the anonymous hands that had chiseled this rock years ago. He thought of the dust, the sweat, the sound of the hammers. All of that noise was gone now. All that remained was this silence, this enduring stillness. High above, a bird called out, a solitary, mournful note that echoed briefly against the stone walls and then faded. Marcus stopped to listen to the fading echo. He loved how the stone held the sound for a brief second before letting it go. He reached a section where the ground rose up to meet the aqueduct structure. Here, there was an inspection hatch, a small, wooden door set into the side of the channel, accessible from the high bank. Marcus climbed the slope. The grass was wet and slippery, but his footing was sure. He knew every dip and rise of this land. He reached the wooden door. The wood was dark, aged by sun and rain. The grain raised like veins on an old man's hand. He reached for the iron latch. The metal was cold, biting into his fingers. He lifted it. With a low groan of timber against timber, the small door swung open. The sound changed instantly. The silence of the valley was replaced by the rushing whisper of the water. It was a beautiful sound, a constant, fluid shh. Oh, it sounded like rain that never stopped. It sounded like a deep, rhythmic breathing. Marcus leaned forward, peering into the dark tunnel of the Specus, the water channel. The smell of fresh, running water washed over him. It was a clean, sharp scent, carrying the memory of the mountain springs miles away. It smelled of snowmelt and cold rocks. He could not see much in the darkness of the tunnel, just the glint of the moving surface. The water was black and glossy, like liquid obsidian. It moved swiftly but smoothly. There was no turbulence here, no splashing, just a unified, powerful purpose. Millions of gallons moving in the dark, carrying life to a city that was just waking up. He closed his eyes again, letting the sound of the water fill his head. It washed away his thoughts. It washed away the concept of time. There was only the flow, the eternal present. The water that flowed past him now would never return, but there was always more water coming behind it. Always new water, same path. He reached into his leather pouch and pulled out a small, dried leaf. He dropped it into the opening. He watched it land on the black surface. For a heartbeat, it swirled, finding its balance. Then it was taken. It drifted away into the dark tunnel, carried gently by the current, embarking on a journey into the shadows. Marcus watched until it disappeared completely. He stayed there for a long time, just listening. The sound was white noise, a blanket of sound that smoothed out the edges of his consciousness. It was hypnotic. It invited sleep, even though he had just woken. It was the lullaby of the empire. Slowly, carefully, he closed the wooden inspection door. The latch clicked into place. The sound of the rushing water was instantly muffled, returning to that low, secret vibration within the stone. The silence of the valley returned, but it felt different now. Marcus knew what was happening inside the stone. He carried the secret of the flow within him. He turned his back to the aqueduct and looked out over the valley. The mist was beginning to glow with a faint, pearlescent light. The sun was approaching the horizon, somewhere far behind the hills. The gray was turning to a soft, dusty purple. The shapes of the olive trees were becoming clearer, their twisted trunks like old dancers frozen in time. Marcus sat down on a large, flat rock near the inspection door. He wrapped his cloak tighter around his knees. He decided to wait here for the sun, to wait for the first true light to hit the stone arches, to watch the shadows retreat. He looked at his hands. They were calloused, stained with the dust of the earth, hands that served the water. He rubbed his thumb over the palm of his other hand, feeling the rough skin. It was a repetitive, soothing motion. Rub, circle, rub, circle. A gentle breeze stirred the grass around his feet. It whispered through the dry stalks. Swish, swish through. It harmonized with the faint hum of the aqueduct. Everything was connected. The wind, the stone, the water, the man. He felt a deep sense of peace settle in his chest, a heaviness that was not burdensome, but grounding, like a stone settling at the bottom of a clear pool. He was exactly where he needed to be. He watched a spider weaving a web between two stalks of lavender. The spider moved with infinite patience, leg over leg, thread over thread, creating a geometry as perfect as the aqueduct behind him. Marcus watched the silk catch the first hint of light. It shimmered, invisible one moment, silver the next. He took another deep breath, tasting the air. It was slightly warmer now. The smell of the wild herbs, thyme and rosemary, was beginning to rise from the damp earth as the day approached. It was a subtle perfume, comforting and familiar. He leaned his head back against the rough stone of the aqueduct wall. He felt the vibration against his spine. It rocked him, gently, steadily. He was anchored to the earth, yet moving with the water. The world was waking up, but Marcus stayed in the quiet. He stayed in the slow lane of time. He watched, he listened, he felt. And in the dim light of the morning, he found his rest. The transition was not sudden. It never was. The world did not jump from darkness to light. It drifted like a leaf falling through honey. Marcus watched the horizon. The deep purple of the distant hills began to dissolve, bleeding into a soft, hazy violet. Then the violet warmed, turning into the color of a bruised peach, and finally a pale, translucent gold. The sun had not yet breached the ridge, but its promise was everywhere. It was in the sudden stillness of the air. It was in the way the mist in the valley floor began to glow from within, turning from a gray blanket into a lake of liquid pearl. Marcus remained leaning against the great stone pillar. He felt the change before he saw it. The air against his cheek shifted. The biting chill of the night began to retreat, replaced by the very first, tentative fingers of warmth. It was a gentle caress, barely there, but enough to remind his body that the day had arrived. Then it happened. The rim of the sun crested the mountains. A single beam of light, sharp and clear, shot across the valley. It struck the very top of the aqueduct arches. For a moment, the structure looked as if it were on fire. The rough limestone, which had been gray and cold only moments before, ignited with a brilliant amber glow. Marcus tilted his head back. He watched the light slide down the face of the stone. It moved slowly, like thick oil, painting the ancient masonry in shades of gold, ochre, and warm terra cotta. He could see the texture of the stone popping out in the angled light. Every pit, every chisel mark, every weathered groove was suddenly defined by a tiny, soft shadow. He pushed himself off the wall. His joints popped softly, a sound that seemed loud in the quiet morning. He stretched his arms, reaching up towards the growing light. He felt the blood returning to his fingertips. He felt his spine lengthen. He began to walk again. This time, his path took him up a narrow, winding trail that led to the top of the lower tier of arches. The gravel here was finer, mixed with sand. His sandals sank slightly with each step, making a muted, shuffling sound. Sh-uff, sh-uff. As he climbed, the scent of the earth changed. The dampness was evaporating. In its place came the smell of dry grass and heated dust. It was the smell of Italy, a dry, baked scent that spoke of long summers and ancient soil. He passed a cluster of wild rosemary bushes. The heat of the sun was already releasing their oils. The air was thick with the resinous, pine-like aroma. He brushed his hand against the woody stems as he passed, carrying the scent on his skin. He reached the maintenance ledge. Here, he was high above the valley floor. The world opened up below him. He could see the silver ribbons of the olive groves stretching out for miles. The trees were still, their pale leaves catching the light like thousands of tiny mirrors. Far in the distance, he saw a thin plume of white smoke rising from a farmhouse chimney. Someone else was awake. Someone else was starting their day. But they were far away, part of a different world. Here there was only the stone and the sky. Marcus walked along the ledge. His eyes scanned the masonry with a practiced, effortless focus. He was not looking for problems. He was looking for patterns. He looked at the mortar, joints between the massive travertine blocks. He stopped at a section where the mortar looked slightly darker. He leaned in close, very close. He narrowed his eyes, focusing on a single square inch of the wall. He saw the tiny grains of sand embedded in the lime mortar. Some were white, some were black, some were glassy and transparent. They were like a miniature mosaic, frozen in time for 100 years. He saw a tiny patch of dried moss, turned brown and brittle by the sun. He saw the faint, winding track of a beetle that had walked across the damp mortar long ago. He reached out and touched the stone. It was no longer cold. It had absorbed the first heat of the morning. It felt alive. It felt solid. It radiated a low, steady warmth that seeped into his palm. He pressed his hand flatter, letting that stored energy transfer to him. It was a silent communion between the man and the monument. He continued his patrol. The path narrowed. On his left was the sheer drop to the valley floor. On his right was the high wall of the Specus, the channel carrying the hidden river. He could still hear it, that constant low hum. It was the heartbeat of the structure. A movement caught his eye. On top of a sun-drenched stone, a small green lizard was waiting. It was motionless, like a brooch carved from emerald. Its throat pulsed rhythmically, in and out, in and out. Marcus stopped. He held his breath. He did not want to startle the creature. He watched the lizard's eye. It was a tiny, golden bead with a vertical slit for a pupil. The lizard was doing exactly what Marcus was doing. It was soaking in the warmth. It was existing. It was simply being. For a long minute, man and lizard stood together in the sun. There was no fear, just two living things sharing the comfort of the morning light. Then, with a flicker of motion too fast to follow, the lizard darted into a crack in the masonry and was gone. Marcus smiled. A small, barely there smile. He looked ahead. The aqueduct stretched out before him, a straight line drawing the eye towards the horizon. The perspective was perfect. The repeating arches created a tunnel of light and shadow. The sun was higher now, and the shadows were shortening, pulling back like a receding tide. He walked on. The rhythm of his steps matched the rhythm of his breath. Breathe in for 4 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out for 4 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. It was a walking meditation. His mind was clear. There were no thoughts of the emperor, no thoughts of taxes, no thoughts of the bustling, noisy city that waited at the end of the water's journey. There was only this, the crunch of sand, the warmth on his shoulders, the smell of rosemary, the hum of the water. He reached a section where the channel made a slight turn. Here, the engineers had built a small settling tank, a piscina. It was a place for the water to slow down, for the sediment to sink to the bottom. There was a stone lid, heavy and thick. Marcus didn't need to open it to know what was happening inside. He placed his hand on the lid. He imagined the water inside. Dark, cool, swirling gently. The mud and sand settling slowly to the floor, leaving the water above pure and clear. It was a process of purification, just like this walk was purifying his mind. The heaviness of life was sinking to the bottom, leaving his spirit clear. He sat down on the edge of the walkway, his legs dangling over the side, safe and secure. He took a piece of bread from his pouch. It was simple, coarse bread baked yesterday. He broke off a piece. The crust cracked with a satisfying sound. He chewed slowly, tasting the grain, tasting the salt. He looked out at the horizon. The sky was now a brilliant, cloudless blue. The day had fully begun. But up here, above the world, the peace remained. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the fabric of his tunic. It was a warm wind, carrying the promise of a beautiful day. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sun bathe his face. He felt the light piercing through his eyelids, turning his vision into a warm, orange haze. He felt completely supported by the stone beneath him. He was part of the aqueduct. He was the guardian of the flow. And for now, everything was flowing perfectly. Marcus stood up from the ledge. He brushed the breadcrumbs from his tunic with a slow, sweeping motion of his hand. The crumbs fell, catching the wind, tumbling down into the olive groves far below. He watched them go, small offerings to the earth. He turned towards the hill. Here, the aqueduct did not fly over the valley on arches. Instead, it burrowed deep into the side of the mountain. The engineers had cut a path through the solid living rock. It was a tunnel, a hidden artery of the empire. He approached the entrance. The transition was sharp. One moment he was bathed in the warm, golden heat of the Italian morning. The next, as he stepped under the stone archway of the tunnel, the world turned cool and blue. The temperature dropped instantly. It was a refreshing, damp chill that pricked at the skin of his arms. It smelled different here. Gone was the scent of dry rosemary and baked dust. In its place was the smell of wet limestone, cold minerals, and the deep, dark scent of the underground. It was the smell of caves. It was the smell of secrets. Marcus walked deeper into the tunnel. The walkway here was narrow, a slender stone path running alongside the water channel. He had to walk carefully. He ran his fingertips along the wall to his left. The rock was rough, hewn, scarred by the pickaxes of men who had worked here decades ago. He could feel the jagged ridges, the cold sweat of condensation on the stone. The sound changed completely. Outside, the world was vast and the sounds were distant. Inside, the world was small and the sound was immense. The rushing of the water was amplified by the curved ceiling. It echoed and bounced, creating a continuous, roaring hush-ha. It wrapped around him. It filled his ears, drowning out the sound of his own breathing, drowning out the sound of his sandals on the stone. He was inside the throat of the mountain. He walked for 100 paces. The light from the entrance faded behind him, turning into a small, bright arch of white. Ahead, there was only darkness, broken at intervals by shafts of light. These were the puttae, the ventilation shafts dug vertically down from the hill surface above. They allowed the water to breathe. They allowed the air to circulate. Marcus approached one of these shafts. A single, solid beam of sunlight poured down from the hole in the ceiling, cutting through the gloom like a spear. It was a stark, beautiful column of white in the surrounding blackness. He stopped at the edge of the light. He watched the air inside the beam. Millions of tiny dust motes were dancing in the light. They swirled and drifted, rising and falling in invisible currents. They looked like tiny stars suspended in the void. He watched one specific speck of dust, brighter than the others, spiraling slowly upwards, carried by the warmth towards the opening far above. The beam of light hit the water surface. This was the only place in the tunnel where the water was truly visible. The light revealed the texture of the flow. It wasn't just a flat surface. It was a landscape of ripples and eddies. The water rushed past the light, catching the brightness for a fraction of a second before plunging back into the dark. It looked like molten silver. It looked like liquid glass, folding over itself, smooth and muscular. Marcus reached into his belt and unhooked a small cup. It was made of battered silver, tarnished by time, but clean. He knelt down on the stone path. His knees felt the cold hardness of the floor. He leaned forward. The air directly above the water was even cooler. He dipped the cup into the flow. Dip. He felt the tug of the current against his hand. The water was strong. It wanted to take the cup. It wanted to keep moving. Marcus held firm. He lifted the cup, now heavy and brimming. He brought it into the shaft of sunlight. He held it up, inspecting the liquid. It was perfect, crystal clear. Not a single speck of dirt. Not a single grain of sand. The settling tanks had done their job. The water was as pure as the moment it had burst from the mountain spring miles away. In the silver cup, the water trembled slightly, capturing the light, bending it, refracting it into tiny rainbows on the tunnel wall. Marcus brought the cup to his lips. The metal was cold against his mouth. He drank. The water was a shock of cold. It tasted of nothing, and yet it tasted of everything. It tasted of snow melt. It tasted of clean rocks. It tasted of the deep, dark places of the earth. It washed down his throat, cooling him from the inside out. It was reviving. It was the taste of life itself. He lowered the cup and exhaled a long, satisfied breath. Ha-ah! The sound of his breath joined the echo of the rushing river. He poured the remaining drops back into the channel. They rejoined the flow instantly, merging with the millions of other drops, continuing their journey to Rome. He stayed kneeling for a moment longer. He watched the reflection of the light beam on the wet ceiling. It rippled and danced, a ghostly mirror of the water below. The light played tricks on the eyes. It made the heavy stone roof look like it was moving, like it was fluid. He felt a profound sense of solitude. But he was not lonely. He was accompanied by the water. In this dark, cool tunnel, shielded from the heat of the day, shielded from the noise of the world, Marcus felt a deep, resonant clarity. His mind was as clear as the water in his cup. He stood up slowly. He clipped the cup back onto his belt. He looked ahead into the darkness of the tunnel. There were more shafts of light ahead, spaced out like beacons, a chain of light leading him forward. He adjusted his cloak. He stepped through the beam of light, feeling the momentary warmth on his face, and then walked back into the shadow, step by step, shaft by shaft, echo by echo. The journey continued underground in the cool, echoing belly of the earth. The tunnel ended as gently as it had begun. The heavy roof of the mountain receded, replaced first by a sliver of blue, and then by the entire, overwhelming expanse of the sky. Marcus stepped out of the shadow. He instinctively raised a hand to shield his eyes. The light was absolute. After the cool, blue gloom of the underground, the noon sun felt like a physical weight, a warm blanket thrown over his shoulders. He blinked, allowing his pupils to contract, allowing the world to sharpen back into focus. He was no longer on the ground. While he had been walking through the dark heart of the hill, the ground beneath the aqueduct had fallen away. The land had dipped into a deep, jagged gorge. Now, as he emerged, he found himself suspended in the air. He was standing on the highest tier of the great bridge, the arcades, nearly 100 feet above the valley floor. Here, the silence of the tunnel was replaced by the voice of the wind. It was stronger up here. Unobstructed by trees or hills, the wind flowed freely, pressing against his tunic, ruffling his hair. It whistled softly as it passed through the open arches below him. Woo-osh. It was a clean, high-altitude sound. Marcus walked to the edge of the maintenance path. There was a low stone wall, waist-high, built for safety. He placed both hands on the warm masonry. It was solid, unshakable. He leaned his weight against it, trusting the stone completely. He looked down. The world below looked like a painting. It was a miniature landscape, perfect and contained. Far, far below, he saw the natural river that carved this valley. From this height, it didn't look like a rushing torrent. It looked like a glittering silver thread, winding lazily through the green tapestry of the forest. He could see the white foam where the water hit the rocks, but he could not hear its roar. The distance swallowed the sound. Near the river bank, there was a small cluster of houses, a village. To Marcus, the buildings looked like children's blocks scattered on a green rug. The terracotta roofs were tiny squares of orange. He watched the life of the village unfolding in silence. He saw a cart moving along the dirt road. It was pulled by 2 oxen. From this height, they looked like slow-moving beetles. He watched the wheels turning, kicking up tiny puffs of dust that vanished almost instantly. The cart was moving so slowly that it seemed almost stationary, a testament to the patience of rural life. He saw a woman hanging white sheets on a line between 2 trees. The sheets flapped in the breeze. Tiny flags of surrender. He saw a dog running in circles in the village square, chasing something unseen, a speck of energy in the stillness. It was a strange feeling, this detachment. He was watching their world, but he was not part of it. He was above it. He was the guardian of the water that would eventually reach them. Yet he remained a ghost in the sky. He felt a kinship with the birds. A hawk was circling a few hundred feet away, riding the thermal currents. Marcus watched it tilt its wings, sliding effortlessly through the air without a single beat. They shared the same view. They shared the same solitude. He turned his gaze back to the aqueduct itself. He looked along the line of the structure as it spanned the gorge. It was a marvel of geometry. The arches stacked upon arches, rising from the valley floor like a ladder to the heavens. The shadow of the bridge lay across the valley below, a long, dark band of shade that cooled the earth. He noticed the plants growing out of the crevices of the stone at this dizzying height. Small, yellow flowers, stonecrop, clinging to life in the mortar. They trembled in the wind. They were brave little things, blooming where no one but the birds and the engineers would ever see them. Marcus reached out and gently touched a yellow petal with his index finger. It was soft as velvet, a stark contrast to the hard, abrasive stone. The water in the channel beside him flowed on, indifferent to the height. It did not know it was crossing a gorge. It flowed as smoothly here, 100 feet in the air, as it did underground. That was the genius of the design. To the water, the journey was always the same, just a gentle, endless slope. Marcus took a deep breath. The air here was thinner, purer. He felt light. The heaviness of the earth seemed to stay down in the valley. Up here, he felt an expansion in his chest, a sense of freedom. He watched a cloud drift across the sun. For a moment, the light on the aqueduct dulled and the colors muted. A cool shadow swept over him, traveling fast. He watched the shadow race across the stone bridge, cross the valley, and climb the hill on the other side. It was a visual reminder of the turning of the world. Then the cloud passed. The light returned, brilliant and golden, warming his skin once again. He stayed there for a long time, just looking. He didn't need to measure anything here. The bridge had stood for 50 years. It would stand for 500 more. It held its ground against gravity with a quiet, muscular tension. He felt a deep gratitude for the stone. It held him up. It held the water up. It defied the empty air. Slowly, reluctantly, he pushed himself away from the edge. The vertigo of the height was a dizzying nectar, but he had to keep moving. The water was moving, and he had to follow. He cast one last look at the tiny village below. The cart had moved perhaps 20 yards. The sheets were still flapping. Life went on, small and precious. Marcus turned his face forward, towards the end of the bridge, where the land rose up to meet them again. He resumed his rhythmic pace, sandals on stone, wind in the ears, walking the high road of the water. The sun had climbed to the very roof of the sky. It hung there, a blazing white eye, watching the world with an intense, unblinking gaze. The shadows, which had stretched long and lazy in the morning, had now retracted. They hid beneath the arches and tucked themselves under the olive trees, seeking refuge from the glare. The world had stopped moving. It was the hour of the meridiatio, the midday rest. Marcus felt the change in the air. The heat was no longer a gentle warmth. It was a physical presence. It radiated off the stone blocks of the aqueduct, creating shimmering waves of air that made the distant hills tremble and dance. The stone, which had been cool under his hand at dawn, was now warm, almost hot, baking in the Mediterranean sun. He sought the shelter of a maintenance niche. These were small, recessed alcoves built into the side of the spicus wall at regular intervals, designed precisely for this purpose. A place for the engineer to step out of the sun to store tools or to rest. He stepped into the shallow shadow. The relief was instant. The stone roof of the niche blocked the direct assault of the sun, creating a pocket of cooler air. He sat down on the stone bench, leaning his back against the cool inner wall. The silence of the morning was gone. In its place was a new sound, the soundtrack of the heat. Z, DZ, Z. The cicadas had awakened. Their song was a relentless, rhythmic buzz that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It rose from the pine trees. It vibrated in the dry grass. It was a hypnotic, monotonous drone. To Marcus, it was not noise. It was a heavy, sonic blanket that encouraged the eyelids to droop. It was the sound of summer sleeping. He reached into his leather satchel. It was time for the midday meal. He moved with the slow, deliberate lethargy that the heat demanded. He unfolded a small square of linen cloth and spread it on the stone beside him. He laid out his simple feast, a wedge of hard, salty pecorino cheese, a handful of dried figs, their skins wrinkled and dark, a remnant of the morning's bread. He picked up a fig. It was warm from being in his bag. He bit into it. The sweetness exploded in his mouth, a rich, sugary contrast to the dry heat of the day. He chewed slowly. There was no need to rush. The water flowed beside him, keeping perfect time. He ate a piece of cheese, the salt replenishing what the sun had taken from him in sweat. After he had finished, he brushed the crumbs away for the ants. They were already scouting, tiny black specks, moving in organized lines along the mortar. Nature wasted nothing. Now it was time for the measurement. Marcus reached into his belt and pulled out his virga, a slender rod made of polished bronze. It was not just a stick, it was an instrument of truth. Etched into the metal were fine horizontal lines, marked at precise intervals. He turned to the open channel. The water glided past, black and glossy in the shadow of the tunnel, bright and sparkling where the sun hit it. He leaned over the water. His movement was steady. He lowered the bronze rod into the center of the flow. The water parted around the metal, creating a tiny, V-shaped wake. Marcus held the rod vertical, pressing the tip firmly against the stone floor of the channel. He held his breath to steady his hand. He looked at the water line against the markings on the rod. The water lapped gently against the third mark from the bottom. It held there, steady. It did not rise to the fourth mark, which would mean a blockage upstream. It did not fall to the second mark, which would mean a leak. It was exactly where it was supposed to be. The depth was constant. The slope was true. He watched the water swirling around the bronze for a long moment. The liquid was clear enough that he could see the submerged portion of the rod, distorted slightly by the refraction, gleaming like gold in the depths. He pulled the rod out. Droplets of water clung to the metal for a second before sliding off, returning to the river. He wiped the rod dry with his linen cloth, treating it with the reverence one might show a religious icon. This tool told him that the city would not go thirsty. It told him that the baths would be full, the fountains would flow, and the gardens would bloom. He put the rod back into his belt. The task was done. The system was in equilibrium. Marcus leaned his head back against the stone wall of the niche. The stone felt solid and grounding against his skull. He closed his eyes. The visual world disappeared, leaving only the sensory world of the afternoon. The smell of hot pine resin wafting from the valley. The taste of the sweet fig still lingering on his tongue. The droning chant of the cicadas, rising and falling like a slow breath. The deep, underlying vibration of the water, rushing just a few feet away. He felt a heaviness in his limbs, a pleasant, warm weight. His breathing slowed down, matching the rhythm of the insect song. In and out, in and out. He did not sleep, not fully. He drifted into that space between waking and dreaming, a place where thoughts became soft and shapeless like clouds. He imagined he was a stone in the river, washed over by cool water, motionless and content. The sun blazed on outside, baking the Italian earth. But here, in the shadow of the aqueduct, there was only peace. The engineer rested while his water worked on, carrying the lifeblood of the hills to the heart of the world. Everything was in order. Everything was flowing. Everything was still. The sun had begun its slow descent towards the west. The fierce, white heat of the midday had softened, melting into a warm, honey-colored glow. The light was no longer striking the earth from directly above. Instead, it was coming in at a slant, stretching the shadows of the cypress trees and turning the valleys into a patchwork of gold and deep green. Marcus stirred from his rest. He felt refreshed, the short stillness having cleared the fog from his mind. He stood up, adjusting his tunic. It was time to leave the high road of the water and inspect the foundations. It was time to touch the earth. He found the narrow service stairs built into the side of a massive pillar. The steps were steep and narrow, worn smooth by generations of sandals. He descended slowly. With each step down, the air changed. The thin, breezy atmosphere of the heights gave way to the heavier, richer scent of the ground. When his foot finally touched the soil, the sound changed. It was no longer the sharp clack of stone against stone. It was a soft, muffled thud. He was back on the earth. He found himself standing in an ancient olive grove that ran beneath the aqueduct. These trees had been here long before the Romans had laid the first stone. They were the original inhabitants of the valley. Marcus walked between the trees. The ground was uneven, covered in a carpet of dry, golden grass that rustled softly against his shins. Swish, swish. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced through the canopy of leaves. He stopped in front of a particularly old olive tree. Its trunk was immense, a masterpiece of nature's sculpture. It was twisted and gnarled, the bark folding over itself in thick, rugged layers. It looked like petrified muscle. It looked like it was in pain, yet it was the image of endurance. Marcus reached out and placed his palm against the rough bark. It was warm, retaining the day's heat. He traced the deep fissures in the wood with his thumb. It felt dry and ancient. He looked up into the branches. The leaves were narrow and pointed, dark green on one side, shimmering silver on the other. A gentle breeze passed through the grove, and the tree seemed to sigh, the leaves flashing silver, like a school of fish turning in the ocean. He looked through the twisted branches and saw the aqueduct rising behind them. From down here, the structure looked different. It looked titanic. The stone pillars soared upwards, straight and true, cutting through the organic chaos of the branches. It was a beautiful contrast. The tree was twisted, wild, and slow growing. The aqueduct was straight, ordered, and engineered. The roots of the tree gripped the earth deep below, drinking the groundwater. The channel of the aqueduct carried the captive river high above, ignoring the earth entirely. Two ways of carrying water, two ways of existing. Marcus walked around the base of one of the stone pillars. He examined where the masonry met the soil. The earth was packed hard around the foundation. There were no cracks. The giant foot of the aqueduct sat heavily, peacefully on the ground. He knelt down in the dry grass. He picked up a handful of soil. He rubbed it between his fingers. It was fine, powdery, and warm. It smelled of sun, baked clay, and dry roots. He let the dirt trickle back down, dusting his sandals. He felt a deep sense of connection. The water he guided high above eventually came from this earth, and one day it would return to it. It was all a circle. He sat for a moment at the foot of the olive tree, leaning his back against its twisted trunk. The bark was rough against his spine, a natural massage. He looked up at the stone arches framing the blue sky. The world down here was quieter in a different way. It was a stillness that smelled of growth and patience. The frantic buzzing of the cicadas had mellowed into a lower, slower rhythm. A small beetle, iridescent blue, crawled slowly over a protruding root, navigating the landscape of the bark. Marcus closed his eyes for just a second, listening to the wind rustling the silver leaves. Hush, hush. It was a softer sound than the wind on the high bridge. It was a whisper. He felt heavy, rooted, and calm. The stone above him carried the flow, but the earth beneath him carried the stone. And here, in the shade of the olive grove, Marcus felt held by both. Marcus climbed slowly back up the gentle slope, leaving the shelter of the olive grove behind. The world was changing again. The day was not ending, but it was exhaling. The fierce energy of the sun had been tamed, replaced by a light so rich and heavy it felt like it had weight. It was the hora aurea, the golden hour. The air had turned into amber. Everything it touched, the dry grass, the dusty path, Marcus's own hands, was gilded with a deep, warm orange. It was a light that forgave everything. It smoothed out the rough edges of the rocks. It filled the hollows with soft, purple shadows. It made the world look like it was preserved in honey. Marcus reached a section where the aqueduct crossed over a wide, lazy river on the valley floor. The natural water flowed slowly below, while the engineered water rushed quickly above. Two rivers crossing paths but never touching. He stopped at the center of the span. He leaned over the parapet, looking down at the river below. The wind had died down completely. The surface of the river was perfectly still. It was a sheet of glass, polished and flawless. What Marcus saw took his breath away, even after all these years. The arches of the aqueduct were reflected perfectly in the water below. The semi-circle of the stone arch above joined with the semi-circle of the reflection below to form a complete, perfect circle. A circle of stone and water. A circle of reality and illusion. The setting sun hit the masonry, turning the travertine blocks into glowing embers. In the reflection, this fire was duplicated. The river looked like it was flowing with liquid gold. It was a vision of absolute symmetry. As above, so below. Marcus stared at the reflection. It was mesmerizing. It was hard to tell where the stone ended and the water began. The solidity of the architecture had melted into the fluidity of the river. He dropped a small pebble into the water. Plip! The sound was tiny, but clear. Ripples spread out from the center, disturbing the perfect mirror. The golden circles wobbled and danced, shaking the image of the aqueduct. Marcus watched the ripples expand, wider and wider, until they touched the grassy banks and vanished. Slowly, the water smoothed itself out again. The reflection returned, steady and true. The stillness always returned. It was the nature of water to seek peace. Marcus raised his eyes to the horizon. The sun was a large, orange sphere now, hovering just above the jagged line of the mountains. It was moving fast. He could almost see it sinking. He felt the warmth of the light on his face. It was a gentle, fading heat. It felt like a farewell kiss from the day. He closed his eyes and let the orange light penetrate his eyelids. He felt a deep warmth in his chest, a feeling of fullness. The smell of the evening was rising. The heat that had been trapped in the herbs and the soil all day was now releasing into the cooling air. The scent of wild thyme was overpowering, sweet and spicy. It mixed with the cool, damp smell of the river below. Marcus took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the golden air. He felt incredibly light. All the worries of the empire, all the noise of the city, seemed to belong to a different lifetime. Here, there was only this moment, this light, this perfect balance. He looked at his hands, resting on the stone wall. They were bathed in the same orange glow as the rocks. He was part of the landscape. He was not an intruder. He was a witness. A dragonfly hovered near him. Its wings were invisible, vibrating in the light. Its body was a needle of blue, contrasting with the orange world. It hung in the air for a second, inspecting him, and then zipped away towards the water. The sun dipped lower. The bottom edge of the sun touched the mountain peaks. The shadows in the valley began to lengthen, stretching out like long, dark fingers reaching for the east. The gold began to deepen into copper, then into bronze. Marcus knew this moment was fleeting. That was what made it beautiful. It could not be kept. It could only be watched. He stayed there until the sun was half hidden behind the hills. The light shifted again, losing its intensity, becoming softer, more melancholy. The golden hour was passing. The blue hour was waiting in the wings. He pushed himself off the wall. The stone was still warm, holding the memory of the sun. He turned his face towards the direction of the flow, towards the city. He walked on, carrying the golden silence with him. The water in the channel beside him rushed on, dark and constant, indifferent to the beauty of the sunset, focused only on its destination. But Marcus walked slower now, savoring the last dregs of the day. The sun had finished its journey. It had slipped beneath the rim of the world, taking the colors of the day with it. The gold, the orange, and the warm terra-cotta faded rapidly, replaced by a single, deepening hue. Blue. It was the blue hour. The sky was no longer a ceiling of light, but a vast dome of indigo velvet. The mountains in the distance lost their details, becoming flat, dark silhouettes cut from paper, pasted against the darkening horizon. Marcus stopped walking. The air was changing again. The dry heat of the afternoon had vanished completely, lifted away by the coming night. In its place was a crisp, clean coolness that settled on his skin like a fine mist. He pulled his woolen cloak tighter around his shoulders. The wool felt scratchy and warm, a comforting weight against the chill. The soundscape of the valley shifted. The frantic, buzzing drone of the cicadas faded away. Their shift ended. In their place came the crickets. Their song was different, sharper, rhythmic. A steady chirp, 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 that sounded like the heartbeat of the night. It was a cooler sound, a sound of rest. Marcus reached for the small bronze lantern hanging at his belt. It was a simple object, battered and darkened by soot, shaped like a pier. He held it up. The metal was cold. He opened the small glass door of the lantern. It made a tiny squeak in the silence. He reached into his pouch and retrieved his tinderbox. His movements were slow, practiced by years of doing this exact task at this exact hour. Click, spark. A tiny shower of orange sparks fell onto the oiled wick. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a small blue flame appeared at the base of the wick. It grew, turning yellow, then bright orange. Marcus closed the glass door. The flame steadied, protected from the evening breeze. The world instantly shrank. Before, he had been looking at the horizon, at the mountains miles away. Now, his world was just the small circle of warm, amber light cast by the lantern. He saw the texture of the stone path, illuminated in sharp relief. He saw the water in the channel, catching the flicker of the flame, turning from black ink to liquid copper. Where the light touched it, the smell of burning olive oil wafted up from the lantern. It was a homely, familiar scent. It smelled of kitchens, of temples, of safety. He began to walk again. His shadow walked with him now, long and dancing against the stone wall of the aqueduct. The lantern swung gently with his stride, creating a rhythmic swaying of the light. Swing and back, swing and back. He looked up. The sky was now a deep, bottomless navy, and there, hanging directly above the dark line of the hills, was the first star. It was Vesper, the evening star. It burned with a steady, white brilliance, piercing the blue veil. It was lonely, but beautiful. Marcus watched it as he walked. It seemed to follow him, a silent companion in the sky. He felt a profound sense of solitude, but not loneliness. He was the only person up here, suspended between the valley floor and the stars. He was the keeper of the flame and the keeper of the water. The water seemed louder now. Darkness always amplified sound. The hush-ha of the flow sounded deeper, more resonant. It sounded like a secret being whispered over and over again. Far ahead, in the distance, he saw a faint glow on the horizon. It was a soft, hazy smudge of orange light against the night sky. The city, Rome, was waking up for its night. He imagined the thousands of lamps being lit in the streets, the smoke rising from the baths, the chatter of people in the taverns. But all of that was far away. Up here, there was only the wind, the star, and the lantern. He focused on his feet. He watched his sandals step into the circle of light, then out again. Left foot, right foot. The rhythm was hypnotic. A night bird, perhaps an owl, swooped silently across the channel, hunting for moths attracted to the water. Marcus felt the displacement of air as it passed, a ghostly presence that vanished as quickly as it appeared. He stopped for a moment to trim the wick of his lantern. He turned the small screw on the side. The flame grew slightly larger, pushing back the darkness another inch. The glass of the lantern was warm now. He wrapped his hands around it, letting the heat seep into his cold fingers. He was a small point of warmth in a vast, cool universe. He looked down at the valley floor one last time. It was an abyss of blackness now. The village, the river, the olive trees, they had all disappeared into the night. Only the aqueduct remained solid, a stone path cutting through the void. Marcus felt safe. He knew every stone of this path. He knew the water would guide him. He took a deep breath of the cool night air, tasting the moisture and the night, blooming jasmine. He turned his eyes back to the path. The lantern swung forward. The star watched from above. The water flowed on, and Marcus walked into the night. The solitary path along the top of the arches finally came to an end. The structure widened, merging into the side of a large, imposing hill just outside the city walls. Here stood the Castellum Aquae, the water castle. It was not a fortress for soldiers, but a fortress for the water. A massive building of brick and stone, designed to receive the flow after its 40-mile journey. Marcus reached the heavy oak door at the entrance. He didn't need a key. He knew the secret latch hidden in the ironwork. He pressed it, and the door swung open with a deep, low groan that echoed into the darkness inside. He stepped across the threshold. The atmosphere changed instantly. The cool, fresh night air was replaced by something heavier, denser. The air inside was thick with humidity. It was warm and smelled intensely of wet stone, minerals, and the deep, metallic scent of contained water. It felt like stepping into the lungs of a sleeping giant. He held his lantern high. The light pushed back the shadows, revealing a space of awe-inspiring scale. It was a cavernous hall, a man-made cave. Rows of massive stone pillars marched into the darkness, supporting a vaulted ceiling that was lost in the gloom above. The floor was not stone, but water, a vast, dark lake that filled the entire chamber. The sound was the first thing that took hold of him. It was a constant, thundering vibration. Rare mumble. It wasn't aggressive. It was all-encompassing. It was the sound of the aqueduct emptying its burden. At the far end of the hall, the water channel he had walked beside all day poured out from a high opening. It fell in a wide, shimmering sheet, crashing down into the receiving pool below. Marcus walked along the narrow stone walkway that rimmed the edge of the great basin. He moved slowly, respecting the slippery stones. His lantern cast a flickering reflection on the water, a dancing orange ghost that traveled with him. He approached the point of impact. The falling water looked like a curtain of liquid glass. Even in the dim light, it sparkled. It hit the surface of the pool with a steady, churning rhythm, creating a mesmerizing pattern of white foam that quickly dissolved into the black depths. This was the finish line. The water had traveled through mountains, across valleys, underground, and through the air. It had been baked by the sun and cooled by the earth, and now it was here. It had arrived. Marcus leaned against a pillar. He felt the vibration of the falling water through the stone. It hummed against his shoulder blade. It was a soothing, monotonous message. He watched the surface of the great pool. Near the waterfall, the water was turbulent, full of energy and bubbles. But as it moved away towards the center of the hall, it calmed down. The ripples smoothed out. The energy dispersed. By the time it reached the far walls, the water was still again, a black mirror reflecting the stone arches above. He watched the settling process. It was like watching a mind quieting down before sleep, chaos turning into order, motion turning into stillness. He walked to the distribution array. Here, 3 large bronze grates were set into the floor of the pool. These were the mouths that would feed the city. 1 pipe for the public fountains, 1 pipe for the baths, 1 pipe for the private homes. The water swirled gently around the bronze bars. It made a soft sucking sound, a quiet gurgle, as it slipped underground again into the lead pipes that would carry it to the sleeping citizens of Rome. Marcus knelt down on the walkway. He placed his lantern on the ground. He took a moment to just exist in this space. It was a sanctuary. There were no people here, no politics, no noise of carts or shouting merchants, only the eternal cycle of the water. It entered, it rested, it left. He watched a small bubble float on the surface. It drifted lazily, caught in a slow eddy behind a pillar. It circled once, twice, and then popped silently. The humidity settled on Marcus's skin, softening the lines of his face. He felt the tension of the long walk, leaving his legs. The sound of the waterfall acted like white noise, washing away his thoughts. It was a wall of sound that protected him from the outside world. He looked up at the vaulted ceiling. He couldn't see the top, but he knew the arches were there, holding up the earth, holding up the night. The architecture was invisible in the dark, but its presence was felt. A heavy, protective embrace. He closed his eyes. In the darkness, the sound seemed to get closer. He became the water. He felt the fall, the splash, the drift, and the quiet exit. He was tired. It was a good tiredness, the kind that comes from a job finished. The water was delivered. The city was safe. The flow was unbroken. He picked up his lantern again. The flame was burning lower now, the oil running out. It was time to go. It was time to let the water do its work in the dark. He turned back towards the heavy oak door. He took one last look at the magnificent, dark cathedral. The water shimmered one last time in the fading light. He stepped out, leaving the thunder behind, closing the door on the secret world of the water. Marcus walked the short distance from the water castle to his modest home. The streets were quiet now. The city had turned inward, whispering behind closed shutters. His sandals made no sound on the familiar stones of his courtyard. He pushed open his front door. The hinges were well oiled. They swung silently. He stepped inside. The house was still holding the warmth of the day, but it was a gentle, dry warmth. It smelled of dried herbs, lavender and sage, hanging from the rafters. It was the smell of home. It was the smell of safety. He placed his extinguished lantern on the small table by the door. Its job was done. Marcus moved to his sleeping chamber. It was a small room, sparse and clean. There was a narrow window that looked out towards the hills he had walked all day. He could not see the aqueduct in the dark, but he knew it was there. He could feel its presence, a silent line drawn across the night. He sat down on the edge of his bed. The mattress was stuffed with straw and wool, firm but yielding. It sighed softly under his weight. He bent down and unstrapped his sandals. He pulled the leather straps loose, one by one. Left foot. He felt the cool air touch his skin. Right foot. He set the sandals on the floor. His feet, which had walked miles of stone and earth, were finally free. He wiggled his toes, feeling the relief spread up his ankles. He stood up and unfastened his heavy woolen cloak. He let it slide from his shoulders. It fell onto a wooden chest with a soft whoomp. His tunic followed. He felt lighter. The weight of the engineer, the weight of the responsibility, lay in a pile on the floor. Now he was just a man. He poured a small amount of water from a clay pitcher into a bowl. The water was cool. He splashed his face. It washed away the dust of the road, the sweat of the sun, and the smoke of the lantern. He dried his face with a rough linen cloth. The friction felt good. He moved to the bed. He pulled back the heavy woolen blanket. The sheets beneath were cool and smooth. He slid between them. The sensation was exquisite. The linens settled over him, cool at first, then quickly warming to his body. He stretched his legs out, feeling the length of the bed. He let his head sink into the pillow. He lay on his back, staring up at the dark timber beams of the ceiling. His body began to shut down, muscle by muscle. He felt his calves relax, the tension melting into the mattress. He felt his thighs unclench. He felt his lower back settle against the soft wool. He dropped his shoulders away from his ears. They sank down, heavy and loose. He unclenched his jaw. He let his tongue rest on the floor of his mouth. He closed his eyes. The darkness behind his eyelids was not empty. It was filled with the memory of the day. He saw the golden light on the stone arches. He saw the green lizard pulsing in the sun. He saw the dust motes dancing in the shaft of light underground. He saw the perfect circle of the reflection in the river. But most of all, he heard the water. Even here, in the silence of his room, the rhythm remained. Hush, hush. It was no longer the sound of the aqueduct. It was the sound of his own blood, the sound of his own breath. He imagined the water flowing through the dark pipes beneath the city, flowing while the city slept, a constant life-giving vein. His breathing slowed, in deeper this time, out longer this time. The bed felt like a boat drifting gently on a calm black river. He was floating. The stone was far away. The sun was far away. There was only the flow, drifting, sinking, softly, deeply. Marcus, the engineer of the water, finally let go. He drifted into the deep, dreamless ocean of sleep. And so, the day is done. The stone has cooled, the sun has set, and the water continues its journey in the dark, watching over the sleeping world. Thank you for walking this path with us tonight. Thank you for slowing down, for breathing with the wind, and for finding the quiet beauty in the ancient stones. Now it is your turn to rest. Like Marcus, you have carried the weight of your own day. You have walked your miles. You have done your work. It is time to set that burden down. Let the darkness of your room wrap around you like a soft, woolen blanket. Let the quiet rhythm of the story linger in your mind. You are safe here. You are exactly where you need to be. There is nothing left to do. There is nothing left to solve. Just the gentle flow of your breath. Just the quiet of the night. Just sleep. Good night, and sweet dreams from the dimmed light.